Okay, so today I'm going to talk about a really favorite topic of mine, which is kind of reconciling unconditional love and discernment. And I made a video called something like, did you put discernment in your shadow? Because I think if you're an empath, if you're a person on the spiritual path, if you've learned spiritual concepts, if you're trying to embody unconditional love, discernment is something that we can lose touch with because we assume that every single thing we feel we're supposed to process as if it's our own psychological content and basically fix it or transmute it. And that is not true. We are energetic beings, and in the same way that we can smell what's on the street, right? Whether it's dog poop, whether it's somebody barbecuing, right? You can smell those things, and we feel information on many levels of our being. And so I want to talk about how to reconcile them. And I think a beautiful image is the tree of life. And there's these two Sephirot, and they are Geburah and Chesed. And basically the idea is that if you don't have a balance between Geburah, which is severity, which I equate with a kind of discernment, if you don't balance that with Chesed, which is mercy, then the energy can't go up the central channel. And apparently you can't, it's literally impossible to achieve or to step into Christ consciousness unless those things are balanced. Why would that be? Well, let's say you only had mercy, right? I'll give myself as an example. I learned this the hard way. I went through a very intense awakening process where I could literally not see anything except love. I couldn't see anything except love. I saw angel lights coming out of people's eyes. And I happened to be living with a person who was extremely abusive. And my heart and my rehab mind, which I focus on helping people and not helping myself, I used ideas like spiritual, unconditional love, and in my mind, that equated to tolerating everything. That equated to, no matter what's happening in the environment, just be in an unconditional love, like an avatar, right? They just radiating love and that's it. But that's not the purpose of my life. I'm not an avatar, and I'm a Western person who has, a life, and I'm gonna, I have relationships and friendships and businesses. And so for me, at least, while one being might be on this earth embodying just pure unconditional love, I need a balance between love and discernment. So I talk a lot about how spiritual ideas can actually snuff out other parts of us that are equally vital and equally important to be operating in our reality. And I think that people are so obsessed with shadow work and taking responsibility for ourselves that even if we dare say yes, somebody abused me, or actually somebody is exhibiting a narcissistic pattern, which is, it's a very strong pattern, right? It's, in order to be pathological, it's a pretty strong pattern. And while I really don't like labels and I really don't think of people that way, it's helpful to be able to call a spade and say, well, okay, this is a destructive pattern. Call it whatever you want, but it is not healthy for me, right? So I'm going to get into some nuances about how this has arisen for me. Maybe it can clear up some stuff for you. So when we're resting in unity consciousness, right, everything is ourselves. Everything is ourselves. We're resting in the heart. I love how Ra in the Law of One says something like, if you're not there, right, if it's not your experience that everything is yourself, one of the most beautiful practices you can do is observe everything and acknowledge you are creator. You are the creator. The mosquito is the creator, and the dog is the creator, and my enemy is the creator, and my boss is the creator. Acknowledging that automatically opens you up into this dimension of truth where it's yeah, that is actually the fundamental truth. Everything is myself. But we also live in a relative, it's true that everything is fundamentally myself. And right now I'm also this character, right? And it's true that as I interact with other characters, that certain energies are at play. I have both the great gift and sometimes the misfortune of being able to read people's unconscious psychic energy. That's what I do for a living, you know, that's what I am trained to detect, and that's something I've always been detecting my whole life. And actually, I think in is it human design, one of those individuation models, like I think for mine, my emotional center is empty, so I actually pick up other people's emotions and I amplify them. And it was interesting to see that like drawn out on a chart for me, because nobody would validate that, right? I always knew that. I always knew that I was picking up on things, because as soon as the person left, like it would disappear, whether it was a body pain, whether it was, you know, if somebody started thinking about me, all of a sudden I would feel a different kind of energy. It's kind of like if you imagine your aura, like let's say you're lying down in your bed and your aura is there. Let's say your aura is clear. All of a sudden there's like a blue color in your aura. And maybe there's an impression there. Maybe you know somebody is tuning into you. Maybe somebody's watching my video. Maybe somebody is focusing on me in a certain way. Like I'm aware of that. And so what I've had to do is balance, like, okay, I can tell when somebody's like 5-year-old revenge energy is trying to attack me. And of course, since I know that, I am very able to hold compassion for all beings. I don't take anything personally, but I also have the discernment to say, well, maybe at this point, the interaction isn't productive, right? If it's a one-time thing, if it's like something like the unconscious energy is just coming out, which all of ours does all the time. Your abuser energy plays with my victim energy. My abuser energy plays with your victim energy. That's how the shadow realm works. Hopefully, if we're awake to that machine, if we're awake to the way that works, then we don't allow it to puppeteer us in our life. And so we have a discernment within ourselves, internal discernment, to say, no, that's not love. Okay, yeah, I feel myself triggered, but I'm not going to spew that onto someone if I can help it. So in my life, like a lot of what that looks like is, okay, I know everything is creator. And okay, if somebody has a pattern, like maybe they hold a grudge or something, or maybe they've decided something about me and they don't consciously want to acknowledge it, but it will come out in some way or another, right? If you don't acknowledge an energy, it will find a way to express itself or to project itself onto the screen of others. That's just how it works. So I've had to balance, like, you know, it's been a struggle for me because I was out of balance. I was more so on the unconditional love side, and I had definitely put discernment in my shadow because as a child, I was aware of really inappropriate and disturbing things going on in my environment that were not validated, like over and over and over and over and over again. So eventually what would happen? Well, I would lose touch with the part of myself that is attuned to the energetic universe, right? I would put it in the shadow because it gets me in trouble, it gets me yelled at. It equals disconnection from God, because if my parents equal God to me and they tell me that I'm crazy or that to apologize for being silly, right? Like, of course, I'm not going to want to exercise that skill anymore. So everything is creator, right? But in the relative universe, there's a state of energy that you're interacting with. And yes, at least in my life, like when something triggers me over and over and over and over again, that's something that I look closer at. Sometimes just relaxing and letting the energy dissolve is all you need to do. Like that's all that is required. Really, it's really simple. But when you have a strong emotion coming up over and over and over again in similar contexts, you might want to ask, like, what is this about? For me in particular, like one of the greatest energies I've struggled to surrender to is aloneness, which is kind of a gateway that we must go through. It's like one of those eyes of the needle. It's like you can't take your fear of aloneness with you, but we really deeply fear being alone because it's it's like the original wound. It's like the wound of separation, right? It's like feeling alone and separate from God, then feeling alone and separate from the womb, and then feeling alone. That for me, like and still to this day, it's something that it hasn't fully transmuted yet. So like when everybody in my world disappears, you know, whether it's like my friends or people that I'm planning on meeting up with soon, or like everybody disappears. And to my conditioned mind, who's like super afraid of being alone, I start to tick. I start to get nervous, maybe pace. I start to like look at my phone, like looking for if somebody has contacted me. And I'm like, okay, this is interesting, right? And that's the energy that triggers me the most. And it's really been a really deep and beautiful lesson for me to see like how I lash out at people when my mind perceives that they're making me feel abandoned, when in reality, like I just feel abandoned. That's an impression in my mind, right? And so thankfully I haven't taken it out on anyone in a long time, but the energy is not fully surrendered because I saw it a few days ago. So, you know, to have the discernment within yourself to see what's operating here, right? What's operating? When you decide, like, I'm going to cut this person out of my life, is it because you're not tolerating your own emotions? Is it because you cannot sit with yourself when you're feeling that aloneness? Maybe it's a combination of a couple things. Maybe it's that you can't tolerate your own emotions, and maybe that person is actually showing up in a state of energy that isn't that you shouldn't tolerate, right? You don't need to be mean or cruel to get it away from you. You can just politely disengage from it. You can just politely disengage from it. It's like nobody makes you go down the street that has, you know, garbage that has been sitting out there for 3 weeks, right? And it's stinking. For some reason, they're not picking up the garbage. You're walking your dog. You can go on another street. You don't have to yell at that street and get upset about it. You just walk another way. So, you know, discernment is really internal discernment. Like what's really going on with me is, am I all of a sudden deciding, you know, to get things away from me and to cut people off really because they're showing up in a rude way, which really does happen, by the way. It really does, especially like when you become empowered and when you stop enabling certain behavior in people. Like I was a big time people pleaser, and I realized like this isn't actually kind. What I'm doing is enabling like shitty and mediocre behavior out of people just because I'm scared to be real. And so what happens is those egos get angry and scared of you because they were really comfortable just interacting with your ego, interacting with the people pleaser version of you. So they'll get like riled up. And how many times in history has people who told the truth or people who were real been killed, right? Witches that get burned for saying we can heal with herbs, Jesus saying God is within you, and so on and so on. And you know what's interesting? Jesus and the rabbi or the Jewish man who received the Kabbalah and many others were exorcists. They had the ability to exorcise demons, which is kind of what I do. I'm not really an exorcist, but through Rohan, I do help people purge the beliefs that attract things like that into their lives, entities and things like that. But they have the discernment, like they had the internal discernment to say, okay, like I can see you as creator, but I also recognize that there's something in you, and people came to them to have those things removed. So yes, you can love everybody unconditionally and recognize that whatever is in them right now is not love. And it's really important that you acknowledge this to yourself. It sounds so obvious, but people, even the idea like, oh, acknowledging that person, when I look into their eyes, I feel a disturbing energy, to have some person tell me, oh no, that's your work. It's like, no, it's not my work. My work is to be real and clear about what I sense in the universe, because that's my intelligence guiding me in a very obvious way towards things that are more life-giving. So, And of course, then if you find yourself in situations over and over and over and over again, you know, you need to ask yourself, what is it within me that is attracting something that's amplifying that thing within me? If I feel deeply victimized by my environment, I'm going to attract more beings that make me feel deeply victimized by my environment, right? And for me, you know, like I said, that very deep trigger of feeling like this intolerance of being able to feel aloneness. If I'm not mistaken, that's one of the gates of, it's probably described in many traditions. I opened a Kabbalah book one day. I was in a spiritual bookstore, and I opened to one page, and that was the page. It was like the gate of aloneness. I forgot what it was called, but I was like, oh, I know that one. I know it, right? And it's no big deal. My intention is to relax deeply and deeply and deeply. And I know that the universe is doing this, like giving me an opportunity to emotionally go beyond that state of being, to emotionally free that child. So discernment and unconditional love go hand in hand, right? I don't remember what the state of being is called. I don't remember a lot of things because my head doesn't remember things, but it's either Turiya or Turiya Tita, where it's like all reality simultaneously. So yes, everything is myself and everything is love, but I can also discern the differences in vibration, and it doesn't really, you know, you don't need to go around discerning all day. You don't need to point out things. It's just really in the context of when something is in your experience and you're interacting with someone. If you have a business and you're gonna, you know, invest $1 million, well, you might want to read the energy of your money manager, right? Or just be aware of it, not even read it intentionally, but be aware of what it feels like. And I think this is like more relevant to the Western character because we're interacting with more data, more characters, more others, more business ventures. We're more involved in the world. So the question of discernment becomes more relevant. And also, you know, a lot of stuff is coming out, like being revealed in our reality. And so it's very useful to be like attuned to your truth so that you can make decisions that personally align with your individual character, right? The choices that are right for you aren't necessarily the choices that are right for other people. So it's interesting that we cannot have Christ consciousness without a balance of unconditional love or mercy and severity or discernment. So really the most important thing is the internal discernment. Like I spoke a little bit yesterday about intention, because, you know, one of the other ways that you really know that you're not being intentional enough or that you're not allowing the universe to be intentional through you is that you're still looking for conversations and people and web pages and Instagram profiles and information. You're still seeking to get into fights. You're still seeking to be triggered. You're seeking to just feel your old familiar emotions that you're just used to. Like, and then you're okay with it. I'm okay with what is, but then I'm just doing the same thing over and over and over again. That's why your life doesn't change, because you haven't decided. You haven't decided that, wait a minute, I recognize that maybe what's familiar to me is to be a little bit disturbed and a little bit bothered and a little bit anxious. So I'm going to look for all the things in my world to validate those emotions. And I do that every day because I can't handle or I can't tolerate feeling bored. I can't relax into boredom. My mind can't relax when there's a space in my experience. It has to go back to the familiar and put its tentacles in the familiar things that trigger me, right? It's important to have the discernment within us, like, am I being real with myself about, am I actually doing the work? Am I actually doing the work? And also being real about the fact that, yes, we do pick up energies that don't belong to us. Although everything is us, right? Us as individuals, we are picking up on information from everywhere. And so it's like, ask the universe, ask your higher self, teach me, help me understand what's the difference between my own emotional reactions and and stuff that's just in my field right now, stuff that I'm attracting. Well, if you're attracting something into your field, like maybe you feel somebody's unconscious energy kind of being spewed at you. If it doesn't bother you at all and you just feel love for that person, it's like, okay, that's done. You felt that maybe they're not in love with you right now, or part of their mind is not in love with you right now, and that's okay. It is what it is, and maybe you've made the discerning decision to say, okay, maybe I shouldn't try to talk to them for now. Maybe they're stuck in that perspective right now. I'll just withdraw my attention. But if I do react and I'm like, what's wrong? She doesn't like me, like, or if you start freaking out or reacting to it or getting out of homeostasis because of something someone is doing, then that is your work. Your reaction is your work, not what you feel. The energy you feel is not necessarily something you need to work on. It's a reaction to it. So when you're not around people that do trigger you, let's say there's people in your life that are pretty much like family or friends you've had forever, and you're not gonna like not have them in your life, right? You want them in your life. It's like that thing I mentioned with Ra, right? To just like acknowledge, like, they are creator. Like, what have they made me realize about myself? What have they made me see about myself? What have they clarified within me? Like, if everything is myself, interacting with myself, walking myself home to become more aware and more loving and more empowered, like, when I'm not, maybe when I'm interacting with them, maybe they still are showing up as, you know, spewing an unconscious energy at you. But when you're not with them, take an opportunity and appreciate them. Appreciate them. Like, everything is creator. Everything is yourself, interacting with yourself, walking yourself home to a state of more homeostasis, of more wholeness, of more awareness. And so you can take a minute and appreciate that. And I have to say, I've noticed that hardly anybody actually does that work, to stop and appreciate. Because if you don't use your mind will use you. Your mind will go back to the familiar, because it's kind of wired to just go back into expending the least amount of energy. So the neural networks that are already fixed, it's just going to go back in those networks. So you have to bring a little intention and a little effort, a little discipline, and say, like, wait a minute, let me use my mind the way I want to use my mind. And let me decide what I want to put into this world. Do I want to put appreciation? Do I want to put like listlessness and resignation by just observing it and just letting it be as it is? No, what do you want to put into this world? What do you want to put into this world? Do you want to put appreciation? Do you want to put the conscious acknowledgement of creator into this world? Do you want to like feel your heart and see them in your mind and say, like, oh, well, that's creator, and whatever character they're showing up as right now, it's ultimately for my well-being. But then when you zoom into your personal reality, that doesn't mean you have to interact with them right now. You can, a friend of mine says, you know, love all beings, but don't necessarily take them all home with you. That's my problem. I used to want to take everybody home with me. So that's how they coincide. That's how you can reconcile them. They are occurring at the same time. Okay, it's not one or the other. And just because you have the ability to discern energy doesn't mean that you have to process it and fix it. But then if you react to it, then if you have a story about it, then if you have a story that attaches to your reaction and you keep it going, then yes, you are on some level addicted to an identity that you hold. Maybe you feel powerful if you're the righteous one, if you're the wiser one, if you're the more aware one, right? You just have to point out how unaware they are. Like, no, that is your work. That is your work. You can be aware of what you're dealing with and just leave it alone. And sometimes in reality, we are called to do more than that. Sometimes if you're in a relationship and you are called to speak, you are called to speak up, to act and say, oh, well, actually, this doesn't feel right to me. So let's talk about this. And you try to talk about it with someone. And if you feel that they haven't decided to be real with you, and they're not really they don't want the same thing you want. Maybe they don't want the same kind of transparency that you want. Well, you have a decision to make. You can go back into your heart and just see them as creator, right? And keep seeing them as creator, and don't collapse your attention onto all of the flaws your mind thinks it sees about that person, and give them a chance to express differently. Or you can make a choice and you can leave. But make a choice, right? People seem to really not want to make any choices, whether it's attitudinal work or whether it's moving away from something. People don't make choices. They just sit back and they read books and they observe and they try to be okay with it. And I'm telling you, it might be a good idea to get a little more involved, right? So in a nutshell, unconditional love and discernment are kind of like opposite poles of a magnet, right? If we go too much on the mercy side, we can get sentimental and nostalgic. And that can trick your ego into accepting things that aren't healthy for you. That can put you back into this hazy, egoic place where you've actually glamorized bad behavior. You've glamorized abuse. If you go too much on the other side, if you go too much on the discernment side, it's like you're cold and judgmental. You're just hiding and you're cold, judgmental. This is a seat of power for you. Right? So we have to balance them. We have to say everything is creator, everything is myself, but I can honor my personal self in this moment right now and simply disengage with things that don't feel good to me. Right? And I can also have the discernment, the internal discernment to say, well, what is this about? Am I recreating the same pattern over and over? And if so, why? What is the energy in me? What is the universe trying to show me? The universe showing me like, hey, you have an intolerance to feeling alone. Go into it, right? Die to it, go into it, because what's on the other side is freedom. So I hope I've shed some light on this topic. I know I had confusion about it, so I will probably talk about it again in another way. I just want to energize this idea that discernment and unconditional love are important parts of our being, and they can exist simultaneously. So that's it for today. Have a beautiful day.